I'm going to take a sidestep for a moment, if you wouldn't mind. And I'd like to begin the homily by asking you to listen in for just a few minutes as a way to ponder on what you just heard in the gospel. And you can close your eyes if you like, or you can keep open, either way. So that's an example of something that I like to do at least several times a week. Y'all know that music has been a part of my life since the time I was a little boy, and that includes learning at a very young age to begin playing the piano, and it's been a part of my life forever. And music to me is such a gift. It's an extraordinary language, and it is for me, it's like my little happy place. It's like my thinking spot. And it's the place that I go when I ever need to unwind and when I need to collect my thoughts, or we'll say maybe de-stress. It's kind of how life goes, isn't it? We move through all kinds of stuff, and the days go by, the weeks go by, and we can get all cluttered. That's just the way that life happens. And all of us have a desire, and every once in a while we kind of give ourselves finally a little bit of elbow room, and we go to that thinking spot where we can organize ourselves again and reset ourselves again. Any of you out there who are like me might do it in a manner like this, right? I'm an introvert, so I am not an external processor. I'm an internal processor. So when I need to kind of declutter my life, or when I need to organize my emotions again, or I just kind of need to be away from people. So I go off to my piano, to my native habitat on a piano bench, and I just kind of don't really know what will happen, but I've played enough piano at this point in my life that your fingertips start to do whatever it is that they do, and it, for whatever reason, seems to work through all of the things you're thinking about, and then by the time I'm done, I always feel better. I always feel a little bit more put in order, and it's such a gift. It's one of the things I'm so grateful to God for in my own life, that I have that kind of outlet to help me recenter myself and to catch up with myself again. And I wanted to offer that as an introduction this morning to help us ponder, to help us understand what's going on in the gospel story, this particular episode in Peter's life, where Peter finds himself, we might say, on his piano bench. Peter, we know his backstory. We understand that before he was an apostle, his profession was as a fisherman. And it's always instructive for us to consider just how odd that is, Peter being the fisherman. And what is it about Peter as the fisherman that would have attracted the gaze of Jesus? And we get a little bit of a clue right into the heart of Peter and into the heart of Jesus in this story that we just heard, in this sort of resurrection account of his appearances to the apostles. Peter is, at this point in his life, just completed 3 years of a big, long camping trip, more or less, literally following along behind the rabbi, Jesus, turns out, who wasn't simply the rabbi, but the miracle worker. Turns out it wasn't just Jesus, the miracle worker, it was Jesus, the Messiah. And Peter is now back to his old stomping grounds, back to his fishing boat. And this really illuminates for us a little bit of the man's personality. And it might give us a clue as to why Jesus would have placed his gaze upon Peter to say, Peter, I choose you. Now imagine if this was your life, if fishing was your gig, if this is what gave you life, if this is what you love to do, what kind of person would you be? What would you be interested in? What would you be like? Well, a fishing boat is a really good spot for a thinking space, isn't it? Because it's not like you're doing a whole lot often. Now, sometimes it's quite busy, but you got a lot of time to think if you've ever been fishing all day, or in this case, in this story, all night. This is evidently something that was a part of Peter's life. A man who loved, in his own way, to be away from the crowd so that he could have time to organize himself and to think about life and to understand what he needed to do, and so he could organize his thoughts. And this was him, Simon the son of Jonah. And it wasn't just that he was only this. You'd have to imagine that if Peter's life on the boat as a fisherman would have surely meant that he was aware of the very many things in the profession of fishing that were like beyond his control, like where the fish were going to be or what the weather was going to be that day. Human beings are land creatures. And so for him to spend so much time on the water would have meant that he needed to be aware and at peace with the fact that circumstances in his life were sometimes going to be beyond his reach, and he needed to learn how to float amidst all of that stuff and be okay with it and not be rattled by it. And this was him, Simon, the son of Jonah. And you would imagine as well that his personality was such that if he was going to be a fisherman for his profession, he knew that he was unable to be successful as a fisherman by himself, that he would need his small squad of brothers around him who, as a team, working together, were able to bring to themselves, right, the sustenance that they needed that would provide for themselves and their family. And this was also part of Simon Peter's personality. But he was also, as a fisherman, a man who well understood that there are many things out in the world and in life that you can't see, that nonetheless you have to kind of bring up from the depths, as it were. And there was no way for him to be able to actually ever do these things except by going out on the water himself and dropping a net over and over and over repeatedly, so that over time he would be able to understand what were the contours of the lake bed and how deep was it here and where did the fish swim at which time of day and where did they feed in which spots on the bottom of the lake. But he could never have seen that with his own eyes. He ever had his net. He had this indirect evidence, this trial and error kind of life that would have required of a fisherman an enormous amount of perseverance and patience. And here was Simon Peter coming back to his, we'll say, his old life, just like getting back on a bike, being able to have that thinking space after all of the things that have changed around him. Now, Peter was still Simon, son of Jonah, and he knew that, just like all of us, right? We always kind of feel like ourselves, but certainly, in this place where he begins again, where he ended 3 years before, he surely also knew that while he was the same man, he was different now. There were things in his life that were never going to be the same. And we think perhaps that he would have been pondering a lot that night about all the things that he had seen and witnessed and wondering what was going to happen next. We know that he's already seen the resurrected Lord, and so Jesus is back, but it's not the same. He's not just following him around day and night. Jesus seems now to kind of come and go, appear and disappear, and now he's appeared again for the third time. And as we sort of watch that movie in our minds, we might look at Jesus on the shoreline as the dawn comes up, looking out on the boat and getting this sort of wisecrack smile on his face, thinking to himself, Peter, I thought I'd find you here. He would have just known him so well. And he calls out to Peter, and he gives Peter this kind of intuition that harkened back to that day that he met Peter. And he said, Peter, why don't you throw your net on the other side? And just like it happened the first time, there's this large catch of fish, which brings about this revelation that's like, oh my gosh, it's the same, it's the Lord. And Peter then, of course, brings himself, swims back to Jesus, and they bring that big catch of fish. And all of this is happening in the gospel story that's been written down for you. St. John the Evangelist says later on in his gospel at the end, he says, if you were to try to fit all of the words and all of the actions of Jesus into a book, not all of the books in the world would fit everything. But St. John says, these have been written so that you may come to believe. And so even though this was the life of Jesus, and this is all that we ever really get, the nugget, for the sake of us being able to believe in God, why would this episode be recorded? Why was this written down of all of the episodes? And we have to just see how unlikely this is, but how beautiful it is, not only for Peter and for Jesus, but for all of us. Because it reminds us of Peter's character, which, we can never fail to be surprised about how unlikely he is. How unlikely it is for Peter to be chosen. The fisherman. Why would the Lord have placed his gaze on that kind of man? It might, I've thought that it might be like, our modern day, maybe you remember 10, 15 years ago now that there was the great crocodile hunter, Steve Irwin, right? It's like, what a character on TV who was really good at what he did. And he just captured audiences by being in really dangerous situations. Oh, crikey. Oh, it's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. I'm going to put my head in its mouth. We're like, what are you doing? And he somehow always got out of it. And a great man. But what would happen if Jesus went up to Steve Irwin and said, Steve, I need you to be the next president of the United States? We would say, God, that is not the man that I would have chosen. You think you might have chosen a politician or a university professor or a CEO or someone that's got much better, life skills in that way, perhaps. And no, he chose the fisherman. But this is such a moment, such a season of change in Peter's life. And a big transformation in his journey with the Lord, right? We know this gospel insinuates that Peter's got stuff on his heart that he has been thinking about, that he knows he needs to resolve with God. And that place when Jesus needed him most, and he denied the Lord, and he wants that to be healed. And that's a part of what happens, right? As they come to shore, Jesus has the charcoal fire laid out. And why does he do that? Because we all know that the best conversations are the ones that happen around a fire. And he asks Peter to bring the fish that he's just caught, and he places all of these things in Peter's life, and even in Peter's person, kind of symbolically there right on the fire, and he asks him that all-important question, Peter, all these things, all the things that you've been pondering about on that boat, all of the things that you've seen in your life, all the ways in which you've changed, you placed all this before me, your past life as a fisherman. Do you love me more than all these things? And it's like a turning point question. And it hits at the heart of a lot of what happens in the life of faith for any of us who decide to follow the Lord. Because Jesus reveals in Peter's life, in the same as he reveals in our lives, that we too, all of us, we need that piano bench, don't we? We need that fire. We need a fishing boat. What's your thinking space? Where do you go to be off by yourself, to sort of put yourself back together again and to reorganize yourself? And to understand that that is often a place where you and I meet the Lord. In fact, it's necessary, isn't it? Because it's precisely in that places where we decide to kind of reorient and reorganize that the Lord says, in all of these things, Do you love me more than these? And that can be a really vulnerable and challenging question, because I think perhaps some of us, or many of us, or at some point in life, all of us might look at a question like that and fear the same thing that Peter could have feared. As he looked back upon his life and Jesus says, do you love me more than these? And Peter might have thought, well, gosh, what was the meaning of all of that? All those things that I'm not anymore, do I have to give all of those away? And God so sacredly and so graciously reminds Peter, no, I need the fish too. Don't forget that. You can't leave that behind. And in that decision that Peter makes to, again, sort of radically reorient his life back to the Lord, God shows Peter how he is ready to call forth Simon, son of Jonah. Simon, son of Jonah, the man that is still the same fisherman, who, unlikely as he was, and Peter would have known, unworthy as I am, what did Jesus see in Peter that he knew that he would need? Except that a leader who might understand the necessity of that thinking space, who didn't always jump headlong without being organized, but appreciating the need to go away from people and to have that time to regroup so that you could hear the Lord's voice again and understand your life's purpose and the significance of your journey. Jesus needed that in Simon the fisherman. Jesus knew that he would need in a leader, a man who understood well that he couldn't have done this on his own, but that he would need his friends around him to support him, so that together in that communion of fellowship, they would be able to bring forth the fruit that would feed so many people. Jesus needed that in Simon, son of Jonah. He would have seen such an appreciation for Peter's understanding of all of the things in life that are beyond our control, like the elements and the weather and the waves, the circumstances that we can't put our fingers around, but we have to abide in peace and not get flustered, but understand that we have to be able to float on top of that. And he needed that still in Simon, son of Jonah. And how much would he have known and desired and honored in Peter's real understanding that sometimes the things in life that feed us most are the things that we can't see, that lie far beneath the surface, that we have to persevere in order to retrieve by practicing and memorizing what can't be seen over and over and over again. And having that need for a man who is really going to persevere in patience. And Jesus needed that man, Simon, son of Jonah, so that he could have revealed to Peter that all of those things in your life that you have made you who you are, I need those parts of you. And I plan not to make you sort of this flat, two-dimensional human being, but in the rich texture of all of you, that all of that is placed before me, so that when all of that is offered to me, then you allow me to supernaturally empower all of those skills to bring forth the fruit of the kingdom. I would bet if any of us had an honest conversation with ourselves along that same vein and examined our own lives about the skills that we have and the personality traits that we've been given and the way in which we've chosen to grow ourselves even as human beings, that we would find God's use for them. I mean, in my own life, at 18 years old, I went off to college because I was studying music and film and media production, and acquired to myself at that time a lot of stuff that I needed, like my keyboard and my loudspeakers and my speaker stands and the mixer and the amplifier and the cords and the microphones and the microphone stands. And for the last 15 years, I've just dragged all that stuff along with me. But here's what's crazy. I use that stuff more now than I did when I was in college. Because even though I'm now called Father Brian, Jesus still needs Brian the piano player. In my ministry as chaplain, I get to take part. I get to use that part of myself and all of that equipment. I still get to lug that around to all the places where we offer our students these opportunities to encounter Christ and to just use that to kind of set the scene and bring people into the, around the fire, as it were, to have those all-important conversations. And I just thank God that, I never could have imagined that here I am, still using all that stuff. I didn't have to leave that behind. It's now just being used for the kingdom in a different way. And so for you all, for us all, what's your thinking space? Where's your piano bench? Right? What's your fishing boat? What's your charcoal fire? And when was the last time that you were there? And if it's been a while, why? Because I think God is so loving and insistent to us that that place is necessary for us if we're going to have a real relationship with him. Because isn't that the place where we really do get put back into order, where we can come back to peace a little bit, where we have those most important kind of conversations, and even where we reconcile with God, where he desperately wants to heal us. Where we come to these new seasons, new chapters in our lives, as it were, full circle, and we realize, man, I've been places, I've seen some things, and I'm the same person, but it's different now. And as Jesus radically offers that invitation to reorient and to put all those things back towards him and to say, yes, Jesus, I love you more than these things. Jesus says, good, and don't forget them. And now you're ready to follow me.